She thinks I still care, just because I ask a friend about her.
Oh, here we are again on the Trout Slayer. Yes. All right. Nice. There's an eagle nesting in our neighbor's yard. They've got a big tall fir tree. And eagles make nests that are like 6 feet in diameter. And so, come springtime, I don't know if it's the same bird, but she's always there raising her little eaglets. Nice. So I was born in Dallas, Texas. I consider myself a California native, though, because we moved when I was like 6 months old. I started walking after we left the state of Texas, so I never really walked or existed in Texas until I got to California. I also don't really resonate that well with Texas, and I lived in the same house for 21 years-ish, 21. Have 3 siblings, a 9-year older brother, Kurt, a 7-year older sister, Carissa, and a 3-year older sister, Colleen. Actually named my daughter, her middle name is Colleen, and that goes back to when I was a little kid. My sister and I were inseparable. My mother called us her little beavers because we would constantly be getting into trouble and playing together. It was a good time. And it's a really interesting dynamic in my family. You have my You have my brother Curtis and my sister Carissa, who were raised by my folks when they were in an entirely different place in life. My father is a pastor. He pastors churches, that's what he does. He's also an author. He's written over 100 original books. He doesn't have a ghostwriter. My dad hand writes all of his books. He gets a writing knot on his, he's left-handed. He gets a writing knot on his left finger that gets about the size, what is something that's similar in size? Imagine just a humongous pea, like a pea pod pea. And he gets one of those, I mean, it's literally like sticking a pea on the end, on the end of his hand. It's a big calloused knot. Because when my father writes his books, he writes so hard, he presses so hard down into the paper. My mom was playing piano for the local church. My mom's a pianist, though she doesn't really play anymore. A lot of people don't know that about her. But she would play the hymns for the local church, and I think my dad was the youth pastor. And so they had interaction between my mom, her playing, and then my father being the youth pastor. I might have something mixed up in all that, but my father, back in the 50s, you would go and you would serve in the military. So my father decided to become a Marine. He was an apprentice in a machine shop, and he was going to be a machinist. He actually doesn't have an undergrad. A lot of people don't know that about my father, but he doesn't have an undergrad. He didn't go to college. He went to machine school, and in machine school, he apprenticed there, and then he was going to go serve in the military. He was going to go serve his time in the military, and then when he was going to come back, he was going to be a machinist. And it wasn't, he had, during his time in Okinawa, he befriended a missionary out there whose name slips my head right now. He befriended a missionary out there, and they would play handball together, and they would talk. And this guy told my father about being a pastor, and this guy was a missionary, and he told my father about being a pastor and leading people to Christ and all this stuff. And my father was taken by this man, and in a good way, not in a bad way. Oh, no. My father actually was a starter. Dick Nemi was the name that just popped in my head because Dick Nemi was the guy that taught my father not how to not stutter. My father was a horrible stutterer in high school, and Dick Nemi, who was the drama coach. I'm sorry that the horizon is cattywampus. But Dick Nemi was the drama coach, and he taught my dad how not to stutter. I mean, if you think about the implications of that occurrence, it's kind of like when Steve Jobs took that calligraphy class before or in college, and that if the fonts ended up being what saved Apple back in the early days. But anyway, because this guy taught my father not to stutter, you know, he ends up becoming this very popular expositor. So that's just a brief history. So my parents got married in 1955, and so my father goes off to Okinawa. He ends up deciding to become a pastor, and my mom is just thrilled out of her mind because she always wanted to marry a pastor. So it's kind of a match made in heaven there. And so he comes back, and Dad goes to Dallas Theological Seminary, and he tells him that he wants to go to college there, but he doesn't have an undergrad. And I don't think Dallas Seminary had ever taken someone as a without an undergrad, but I might be mistaken. But he was accepted on probation, and he had to get a B plus or better, or B or better in order to stay, and he ends up getting straight A's. My dad just absolutely killed it in seminary. He took to it like a duck to water. Anybody, you know, that's the way it is with gifts, man. You find something that you know that you really love. I mean, you're going to become good at it because you're going to put your heart and passion and soul into it. And that's what happened to my father. So, he ends up graduating seminary. They have a really hard time in seminary. They're poor as church mice. My parents had nothing. My father would mow lawns at the seminary. He was a groundskeeper. He did everything that he could to make it. They had help. They had financial help from people, and just it was a very, very difficult time for my folks when my dad was in seminary. At this point, you know, my brothers Curtis and Carissa are being raised by my folks all during this time while he's in seminary and while all this really difficult stuff is going on. And so my parents have no money, and they're going through all this trauma in their personal lives. And so my Curtis and Carissa grew up in an entirely different environment than me and my sister Colleen did. He ended up going to New England at one point, and that's where my sister Colleen was born. And then I was born in Texas. He went back down to Texas. He took an offer there in Texas. My mom couldn't get out of New England fast enough. And so we just are as different could be, me and my brother. And I know that that's also because he's a firstborn and I'm a lastborn, and just dynamically the psychology of those two are vastly different in the families. And so the personality traits that are typically fostered and that which blossom, you know, completely develop two totally different people with two totally different values. And if you were to compare me and my brother Curtis, you could not juxtapose two more different people than me and my brother. And part of that is because we were just raised in this really different situation. So I come along, it's 1970, I was born in 70, and we moved. My dad accepts a pastorate at First Evangelical Free Church in Fullerton, California on Malvern Avenue. It's this tiny little church in this little city called Fullerton, California. I think they bought their first house for something like $49,000 in Southern California, mind you, Fullerton. And this was before the big real estate boom hit in the 70s. And so my parents, my dad takes this job, and homeboy is like kills it. I mean, my father absolutely kills it. And so they are packing the house at this church. I mean, packing the house. People are standing up in the aisles. They're sitting on the windowsills. I mean, the fire marshal's being called in. I mean, my dad runs for something like 5 years. My dad runs 5 services a day. 3 services in the morning and 2 services at night. And the services in the morning, he held a different study than the services at night. The services at night was more of kind of like a Bible study, and so there wasn't worship music and things like, or not as much worship music and things until much later. But my father runs this schedule for years. And so they're just blowing the church out of the water. And so they end up building a second building. They move into that building. It's something around 1980 or something. 81 is when they finished the church in Brea. And the first Sunday that they opened, they turned people away, which is an unbelievable situation for people that have ever run a church, because the first thing you want, the reason why you build a building is so that you have room to expand. You have room for everybody to be able to have a place to sit. And it was so difficult for people because you had these charter members that were being turned away because there was no room the first day they had opened the building that was intended to be a room for expansion. So needless to say, my father was a part of the entire church mega church movement that happened in the 80s. And that's when I grew up. 1980, I was 10 years old. My father his book started selling in the late 70s. For those who heard, Killing Giants and Pulling Thorns, Second Wind, these were all his early books, and they did well. I remember when my parents would talk about meetings that they were having with the publishers, Zondervan, Multnomah Press, and these people, and Word Books. And it's amazing to be raised in a home with a father who is so popular. I mean, his books were selling. He was number one in the Christian book selling market, and it grew, and it became an empire. My mother started Insight for Living around 1976, and Insight for Living radio ministry is taking his ministry international. And so then what you get going on is at the church at EV Free, we're drawing in people internationally. So not only is the church full just from the local community, but then you have hundreds of guests. I mean, in the summertime, hundreds of guests. RVs are coming in. People are coming in from all over the United States to come see this guy preach that they've been hearing on the radio. And so this is going on all during my youth. And I saw a side of Christianity in the ministry that very, very few people are exposed to. I saw the corporate side of Christianity. Most people, their experience with Christianity is just the local church. They show up once a Sunday, and they experience what the very best that the church has to offer. It's almost like a date. It's like your first date. You're going to put on your best impression, your best shoes, your best outfit. Put your hair up really nice. And this is what you get with church, the corporate side. And so Sunday morning, man, that's, as my dad calls them, they're all the customers. And so they come in, all these folks, and I saw kind of this really nasty side to it, which is just the nasty side to any kind of business where you have hard conversations with people that customers never see. Where you ask hard questions and you deal with difficult things. Affairs are going on all during this time. I'm watching pastors that are, having irresponsible relationships, and I'm seeing all of this going on. The pastors are coming to the house, and we're having pastor meetings right in the living room. I'd come home from school, and there's Eric Herder, Doug Haig, Alan. Ed Neuenschwander, all the pastor guys, all these old guys from EV Free, and nobody experiences that. Certainly not from one of the biggest mega churches that exists on the planet at that time. My dad was only second to Graham as far as church size and ministry size, but Insight for Living is now reaching something like half the planet's population, 16 languages or something. I'm not sure. It's an empire. So I'm exposed to this side of church that very few people see. And what it does is it takes away its luster. Years ago, I worked for Harley Davidson, And up until the time I worked with Harley Davidson had kind of this mysterious magic to it. You know, it had kind of this amazing aspect to it that, you know, it's kind of mysterious and it's all this history and stuff, and you know, it's kind of this bad boy image kind of a thing, you know, and all that stuff that was going on in the 80s that was really popular back then. And what happened is when I started working for Harley Davidson, the mystique, the mysteriousness, the luster kind of wore off, because I'm seeing the meetings, we're talking about mean customers, bikes are breaking down, people are coming, bringing them into service, you know, and just like any dealership deals with, I mean, Hondas break down, Mercedes break down, you know, all you know, it's part of manufacturing, it's part of having these motorized vehicles. And so you suddenly see that, oh, this is just another bike company, you know, it's just people who's got a job, you know, painting bikes, setting up bikes, fixing bikes, selling bikes, you know. And so in Christianity, it's the same kind of idea. Just like, well, you got pastors that are having affairs, other pastors that are moving and leaving, other pastors that say inappropriate things in church. I mean, one pastor said some terrible racist things at church one Sunday. I mean, we lost like, that's like 25 families, you know, and I'm seeing these arguments going on in the house, and all this stuff is happening. So the luster that is typical with a church from a person who only sees it on Sunday and Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, is gone. And so you're not enamored with it. You're not enamored by it. And it becomes just an organism just like anything else, and you start just like treating it like you would anything else, because it's not anything special. It's not something on a stick anymore. And so this allowed me later in life, I wasn't aware of this at the time, but this allowed me later in life to be very easily to step away from it and kind of look at it like an organism, instead of looking at it like it's this real intense relationship thing, but looking at it more like just a business, like an organism. And that allowed me, as I began to assimilate my problems and my issues and why I was imperialistic and why I was self-serving and why I had this self-righteous, indignant approach to life, and I thought everybody had to be a Christian or they weren't going to be happy, you know, why I had these delusional ideals and stuff. It was much easier then to step away from that and look at it objectively and say, what's really going on here? What's the psychopathy at work underlying this religion? And why, if it is the penultimate religion that God, quote unquote, himself conveyed to humankind, why does it have such a horrific, demanding, dismissive, lack-generating, dependence driving aspect to it? Why is it like that? And why does it use fear and threat to get people to become a part of it? You know? Why do you have to tell people they're going to go to hell if they don't believe you? You know, why is that necessary if it's a legitimate religion? And what kind of a religion would put an ultimatum like that and surround it in something they call unconditional love, you see? And so as I began to self-analyze and go through this stuff, because I had this whole history of this no luster with the church, there was no enamorment that I had to break through. And so I was able to get real objective with it, which is what I'm hoping to convey to people here in these little videos that I'm doing. And this abuse bond video that I don't know if I'm going to release it before or after I release this video, but this abuse bond video is an effort to be an individual that, just like a friend who is sitting across the table from you, and you're telling them the story, and they see some holes in the story, and they see some problems in the story, they would say to you, hey, there's a couple things I'm not sure you're really aware of. There's a couple things I'm not sure you're seeing here. And any friend would sit and listen to that, and the best friends are the ones that are the most honest with you. The best friends are the ones that will tell you, yeah, your dress looks horrible on you. It doesn't fit you well at all. Or, no, your haircut's messed up. You know, I don't think it's good at all. Or, you know, encouragement to you by saying, you know, yeah, you're an incredible mom, and here's all the reasons why, because these are the ways that I know and love you. Well, any friend is going to do that for another friend, and so that's what I'm doing here. And it can come across as though, like I've got some kind of axe to grind, and like I've got, you know, some kind of anger problem or something. And nothing could be further from the truth. because I'm just sitting across the table from you and saying, hey, you know, this religion you're looking at, you know, there's some things there that I've identified that are really a problem, and you can't solve them. They're not solvable. So anyway, growing up in this little kingdom, where I think I'm right, and I'm the pastor's kid, you know, I'm the king's kid, I'm kind of untouchable, you know, you're not aware of all this stuff as a kid, but at the time, that's what's going on. And it caused me to have these really weird behaviorisms. And I kind of became a jerk, and without realizing it, you know, this self-righteous, indignant jerk. And which is why I so often am saying that in these videos. It's because that's the exact psychopathy that I dragged myself out of to come to terms with reality. And so that was one of the challenges growing up in such a isolated, alienated situation where you're the king's kid. Who else is the king's kid? Nobody else is the king's kid except your siblings. And so coming out of that was essential to my staying sane. Because when you live your life so in these delusions where you think that people can actually learn something from you, where you think that people actually can find answers from you, in the sense that it's like, here's the 8 things you can do and you will be successful. Here's the 10 things you can do for your relationship to Jesus Christ and you will have a successful relationship to Jesus Christ. And these are all delusions. They're delusions because they are worked for them, but they will most likely not work for you, because being raised in whatever situation that you're in, you're going to have different things that you're going to need from life in order to make sense of it, because it's not made sense in all these specific ways, and you're trying to work that out. And if somebody comes along and says, hey, here's all the ways I've made sense of it and it works great and you need to do the same thing, it's like, well, how does that apply to me? Because all the things that you've had to work out, maybe some of those things I worked out when I was a kid. I don't deal with that stuff anymore, you know? And so, yes, you can glean insight from people. Yeah, you can certainly say, oh, you know, they did that. Well, that sounds like that might work for me. I'm going to go try it in this different way, you know, that kind of thing. As far as like, that's it, that's the answer. Like Christianity comes in and says, God is this, and you have to do these things, and you have to have a relationship with him in this way, and you have to behave in these moral, quote unquote, moral ways that we are going to tell you about, that you are going to have to do in order to stay a quote unquote true Christian and to stay in quote unquote right relationship with God. It's all just management, constantly managing and fidgeting with your life to make it this righteous existence, which it never will be, because the process of learning is through mistakes. And so these different aspects, these different ways that have caused me to take an entirely different turn in life, and I've gone in a completely different direction, because the solutions that I found for me were not found in the solutions that my brothers and my sisters found. We have very different conclusions in life, and I have very good reasons for my conclusions, and they have good reasons for theirs. And yet I've come along, and I'm not saying I'm anything special, but I've come along and I've taken the whole darn thing apart and psychoanalyzed it. And when I came away from it, it was like, well, that's not a tenable option. That religion is not going to offer a tenable solution. And so that's simply why I've just decided to go this different way. And this different way, I'm hoping, will help shine a light and help others in one way or another in their own life. But I certainly don't have all the answers, and I certainly know that I'm not right. But I am trying, and I am looking. What is the meaning and purpose and reason for all these behaviors that I embrace? You know, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm hoping to elucidate.